This is Talks, where people speak to people about crafting brands and the power of storytelling. Matt, thank you for being with me.
My pleasure.
It's such a pleasure to have you. Today we were together in Malta, launching the brand identity for Commonwealth Youth Games in
Exciting,
Malta.
isn't it? It's good.
It is indeed. It's 500 days ago. We were just talking about the power of countdowns, whether they're good or bad, but they are there.
Time is ticking.
They are a good reminder of some of the work we have ahead of us.
There's plenty to
do. But thank you for joining me today. I would love to speak to you about the values of the Commonwealth Sport brand, your role as brand manager of the brand, and what it's all about. So let me start with the last one. So obviously the games, the purpose, what do they stand for? So what is the brand narrative that you live by, day by day?
Well, obviously, at the centre of it all is elite sport. That's always at the centre of everything we do, is top level sport, and the athletes are always at the centre. But I think what sets the Commonwealth Games apart, and has always set them apart, is the community that's built around the sport. And that's really important to us. So, one of our mottos as an organisation is sport is just the beginning. And I think that feeds into the fact that we see it as kind of a circle. There's no hiding from the fact that the Commonwealth Games are the pinnacle of what we do. Mm-hmm. Without them, we wouldn't be able to do everything else that we do. But it's not the end. For some of the athletes, undoubtedly, when they reach the top and they get a gold at the Commonwealth Sport, that's the peak. But for us, what it is it's a circle. So that major sporting event feeds back into everything else that we do for the other 3 years. Okay. Then we build back up to the games again, and it feeds back. So, we see sport as something that can change communities. We look at athletes as not just elite athletes, but as potential influences in their communities. So we encourage them to stand up and speak out. That's something we're very big on, and we encourage them to go back and share everything that they learn from the Commonwealth Games with other athletes, with other people in their community. So we see it as something that that feeds back into the whole Commonwealth. And not only that, I think we put a really big emphasis on the sharing of culture. The teams don't just come to compete against each other. Obviously, they all want to beat each other as soon as they get out into the track or the field. But everybody wants to beat the person next to them on the field of play. But outside of that, it's about sharing cultures. It's about sharing knowledge. It's about learning from each other. And that's what the Commonwealth side of it is. This isn't just a tournament that anyone can enter. It's a group of countries that have chosen to work together. And to become this community, this worldwide community. So the Games is a central part of that.
I love what you have on your sleeve. You have more in common.
Yeah.
Which I think is one of the values that the Games bring, right? In terms of the ethos and the legacy that the Games have been around for decades.
Yeah.
Essentially.
So 100 years in 2030. So we are centenary.
Fantastic. How do you preserve that legacy in one edition after the other? Whether it's the big games, whether it's the youth games, how do you preserve all this?
Well, I think it's as with anything, with any brand really, I think it's about staying true to what all the things I just said. We need to remember that every time we put a games together, whether that is a youth games or a full games, it has to be at the forefront of our mind that it's about celebrating culture. So when we come to Malta for the games in 2027, as you know, we've spoken about this a lot when it comes to the branding, it has to be a celebration of Malta. It's not a celebration of the Commonwealth Games, it's that as well.
Yeah.
But what we need is that every Games celebrates that culture, shares that culture with the world. And it's important for us that we spread the Games around. That's something we're looking at doing more and more. Obviously, with the main Games, there's sometimes difficulties with infrastructure and the size of countries who are able to host it, but Glasgow is the reset for that. Glasgow is being, the Games is being put on for far less money than any of the other games have been put on for.
Okay.
It's a real reset in the way of thinking, and that's going to allow us to share the games around more. We still want to take games to Africa. We have taken games to smaller islands, to all across Europe. We've taken it to America. So it's it's all about kind of knowing when we go into a games, what are we here for? And it's not just the games, it's not just the competition, although that's central. It's about everything else around it. And that's where the heritage comes from.
Matt, one of the things that intrigued me when we started working with you on this brand journey is in fact the importance that you were placing on culture, on localizing, and on the fact that the games are a great vehicle for storytelling. And probably if there's a good parallel between sport and branding is this emotional journey, right, of athletes, of officials, of federations, of hosting nations. How do you preserve and make sure that the two remain together, remain intrinsically linked from both a sport point of view and a brand point of view?
Yeah, so I mean, I think, again, any brand, any strong brand has to be built around stories because that's what people react to, that's what people are emotionally invested in. And we're quite lucky, really. I mean, on two fronts when it comes to marketing and branding in sport. First of all, there are no end of stories. You know, every athlete who wins is a story. Every athlete who doesn't win is a story. Every athlete who gets to the games is a story. The coaches are stories. The countries are stories. Everything, everyone has worked so hard to be where they are and overcome obstacles to get to where they are. So we're never short of stories. And as long as you remember that the athletes and the teams around them are at the center of what we do, we're not going to struggle for stories. The other thing with sport is that we don't have to build passion for sport. You know, that's one thing when you work in sport. You know, if I go and walk my dog on a Sunday morning in the park and there's a game of football, I'll stop and watch it. That's what sport does, you know, and that Sunday League team have done no work, no branding, no marketing. Sport is what makes people, and other people will do the same. You look around, there are people watching that game of football. What we need to do then is to go, well, how do we get that person to come back? How it's fan engagement after that. You know, how do we have this person, they enjoy the sport, they enjoy the 100-meter sprint or whatever. How do we make them emotionally invested in what we do? And that comes down to two things, I think. Having strong values, knowing what you stand for as a company, because if people agree with those values and they're interested and invested in them, they'll keep coming back. But it's also about telling the stories of the people involved. You know, we know that when we're creating content, when we're creating videos for social media, the things that do best are the people's stories, because that's what people are interested in.
We talk a lot about the human-to-human connections, right, and the human-to-human conversations. And one of the things that really intrigued me this morning, yes, we were launching a brand, and yes, it was about the inspiration of the brand, the movement of the island, so on and so forth. But was actually the story of a young athlete, whereby he was actually telling his story about how he participated miles away from home. He finished fourth, but that was actually a moment that defined him. Yeah. How do you preserve this element of culture, this element of identity, in order for the Commonwealth ethos, sport ethos, to remain unchanged, one edition after the other? In branding, we call it brand guidelines. But how do you translate that then to a worldwide event?
Yeah, I mean, well, obviously we have brand guidelines, but I think beyond that, it's about making sure that host countries understand what the games are about. And I think once they do, I mean, you know, working with the Malta team here, it's clear that they and you get it. And that's really important, first of all, is that if early on the host nation understands what the games is about, then they will put on a games that fits in that ethos. You know, it's about keeping that as strong as possible. I mean, it's funny what you say about Kai, the athlete earlier. He's a really great speaker, isn't he? And you know, his story about coming fourth is exactly what I mean. And that, you know, it's very easy for us to just tell the stories of the biggest nations, the most famous athletes, and the ones who win the golds and break records. That's kind of easy to do that, but for us, it's very important that we tell the stories of every other nation. You know, we've got islands that have a population that's probably smaller than the biggest teams that get sent to the games. You know, Niue is, I'm not sure what the population is, but it's in the thousands.
Ooh.
And they are important. They're as important to us as Australia and England and Scotland.
Yeah, with
and
big
everybody
contingents.
Else. Everybody has one vote at our General Assembly. Everyone's equal. and they're just as important to the game. So for us, it's about making sure that we bring their stories up. You know, they might not have the social reach, they might not have the big team behind them. We have to make sure that those stories are just as important as the stories of the biggest athletes and the biggest teams, because they're what makes the games. You know, that's the Commonwealth Games, is that we all work together and we're all equal when we get there.
Matt, you're talking a lot about emotions here. Whether you're coming from a huge continent or whether you're coming from a tiny island. What are the connections that you'd like to see carried forward, even from Malta 2027 and Glasgow in a month's time, in 40 days' time? What are the connections and the emotions that should shape it in terms of the brand, the addition, the family of Commonwealth, so on and so forth?
I think celebration and a feeling of togetherness is probably what defines the games, because it's not necessarily just a celebration of winning, it's a celebration of being there. It's a celebration of, it's the way the city comes out around the games. You know, you'll see when you come to Glasgow that it will transform the city. Everybody gets involved.
Do you feel that part of responsibility? Do you feel that sense of responsibility when you go on site and you see this transformation of Glasgow and Malta in 2027?
Of course, and I think it is a responsibility for us, but it's also something that we can pass on to that host nation and say, look, you know, there has to be an element of it. It's why it's so important that we have an OC, a company set up in the country to run the games, because we can't dictate the way that runs. It has to be natural, it has to be organic, and it has to be led by the local culture. So, you know, the way that Malta will transform for the games will be completely different from the way that Glasgow transforms. And that's the way it should be, and that you'll do it in your way and they'll do it in their way. And I think the athletes, you know, they will go home from the games feeling like they've seen the best of this country. And that's the most important thing, that they will have enjoyed a celebration and a festival around sport, and they will go home inspired to talk to their communities. And that's the most important thing, really, is what they take back with us. Kai mentioned it as well, didn't he? That, you know, he went home a different athlete and talked to other athletes. Yeah. You know, and
his testimonial, essentially.
Exactly, and that's the most important thing, because, you know, we have coaches that. One of the things that's super important to us is you might have kids in sports who aren't expected to play those sports. You know, women playing men's sports, or sports that aren't popular in those countries, or maybe are even frowned upon in those countries. We send athletes home feeling more confident, feeling supported to share their sports with other people, and so that's something super important as well. So the games is 10 days, a week, whatever, depending on where it is. It's what happens afterwards that's the most important.
I think this leads me on to your role as brand manager of Commonwealth Games, right, and Commonwealth Sport, because ultimately this is a responsibility you carry with you way before you land in the host nation. So obviously the work starts. We've been working with you for a few months now, and obviously the work starts before. How do you make sure that when you're working on a global brand from your office in the UK, but working with different countries, different nations, so on and so forth, how do you ensure that Matt's checklist is complete? And is that a checklist in the first place?
Sometimes with great difficulty, I'll be honest. It's about relationships. I think that's the most important thing, you know, that we come out here and meet you guys, because it's a lot easier than sending an email asking you to change things having never met. And so it is important that we take everybody along on the ride. You know, we have to make sure that when the rebrand happened at Commonwealth Sport, we had to work with all of the CGAs. Every member had to be on board, because ultimately they're our sort of voice in each of their countries and regions. So if they're not along and jumping on board with us, then it's not going to work. So it's a lot about relationships with them. We have regional managers in each of the 6 regions that we can lean on. They have the great relationships with each of the CGAs. So yeah, it's a sort of a long line of people that we can deal with that are closer and closer and closer. Yeah. Okay. But ultimately, I think, you know, it's about trying to create guidelines that are strict enough that that people will recognise our brand, but loose enough that people feel like they've got some creativity involved with it.
Because obviously you are working with a multi-nation brand, essentially here. You mentioned the CGAs. Today we spoke about the inspiration of the brand. The 6 lines are actually the 6 regions of the Commonwealth. How do you ensure that creating and leaving this element of creative freedom is still important in terms of making sure that the Commonwealth remains intact, that the values remain intact? Because everyone has their own values, right? Every host nation wants to bring something home. How do you get it together? Because this is the beauty of branding, kind of making it all group up at one point in time.
Yeah, I think, again, it comes from having a very solid core. I think that's it. At the very centre of what we do is humanity, equality, and destiny. There are 3 kind of pillars that we talk about, which is about sort of being the best athlete you can possibly be. It's about knowing that the future, there's lots to come, and equality speaks for itself. That's one of our key pillars. That we treat everybody the same. We have integrated para schedules, etc., etc. So, those are things that we really stand by, and you can feather out from there. So, everybody, all the CGAs are agreed upon those. They are where we start, and how you then disseminate that information, how you then work with that is to a certain extent down to your local region. Because the other issue is, of course, that we can't dictate, because different cultures work in slightly different ways. They use different social media. Some cultures are all over WhatsApp, some are Instagram, some are
different messaging touch points, right?
We can't dictate everything from a central point. We have to kind of feed the message out and make sure that the CGAs understand it and that they want to share the message. And when they do, they'll do it in their own way. Some of them, have very, very strong brands of their own. And then it's about sort of making sure that our brands work together. But some of the biggest teams, they are very, very strong brands to their public. So we don't want to change that. Team England, Team Australia, Team New Zealand, they are huge brands. So we want to let them become huge brands, but just make sure that everything is somehow...
Almost complement them rather
exactly.
than... I like those 3 pillars. And if I made those 3 pillars in a multi-nation brand that we had the pleasure to work with you, are actually a great definition parameters in order to create an addition element, which actually leads me to my last question. In 500 days, you'll be spending a few weeks in Malta. What are you looking for in terms of the addition? What are you looking for in terms of the challenges that we might have and the opportunities for the circa 1,200, 1,500 athletes that will be on the island, to pursue their dream?
Well, I think certainly for the athletes, we want the best level of competition possible. We want to see these athletes are incredible. They might be young, but they're the best around for their age groups. So I know, knowing our sport team, knowing the team in Malta here, that the competition, the venues are incredible. We've no worries about the sport. That's going to be fantastic. So I think beyond that, what do we want to see is a slightly redefined games, and I think that's what we're getting in Glasgow, and I think that's what we're working towards in Malta. We don't need to do things the way they've always been done, especially with the youth games. Let's look at how we can do things in a different way. Rather than think how was it done last time, let's say how can we do it this time. And
almost like marketing, let's be agile.
Absolutely, we're flexible, and the youth games more so than the main games, I would say, because it's slightly smaller and it's easier to shift around. But that's what we're trying to do now. Is we're looking at the future of sport, not what's happened before. Obviously we're going to spend some time looking back once we hit 2030 in the centenary. We're obviously going to be looking at the history of the games, but realistically, it's not about what's gone before, because multi-sport events are changing. All of them. The Olympics are changing. The World Cup is certainly changing. They're all looking around and saying we can't keep doing it exactly the way it's been done. We have to find different and new ways, and that's exciting. I think that's really exciting that we can be looking at the games in Malta and saying, how do we do this? What do we do? That's a really interesting way to be. So I think people will come away from Malta having a slightly different experience than ever before. They're going to love the island because, you know, it's a beautiful island. The weather's good, hopefully. The weather's always been good when we've come here. The venues are incredible. So the athletes and the spectators will have an incredible experience. I just hope they go away having really picked up a bit of culture from other Commonwealth countries. That's the greatest thing for me, is that, you know, the athletes from Malta, these guys that were here earlier, they might be in their home country, but they're going to meet athletes from Africa, from Asia, all over the world. They're going to meet athletes with completely different cultures. And I think, you know, that's interesting to somebody my age. But when you're 15, 16 years old and in school, that's an incredible opportunity. So absolutely. That's what I hope they'll take away from it.
Absolutely. Well, Matt, I love the brand novelty and the challenge that you gave us. Thank you so much. I wish you a fantastic edition in Glasgow, and see you in Malta in 500 days' time.
Can't wait. Thank you very much. Cheers.